Hi there, everyone. Welcome to the Horn Call podcast. My name is James Bolden. I'm the publications editor for the International Horn Society and your host. Before we get to our amazing guest today, I want to just share a couple of goings on with you. It is now April of 2024, and we're coming right up on the publication of the May issue of the Horn Call, our official journal of the IHS. It's been one of those issues where we sadly had to say goodbye to some really, really important people in the horn playing world. Herman Bauman, John Covert, and Willie Ruff all passed away since our last issue, and I think you will be very moved and inspired by the tributes to all three of these wonderful people that you're going to read in the pages of the May Horn Call. So be sure to check that out when it becomes available. And if you didn't know yet, the Horn Call, as of February 2024, is now being printed in full color. So the PDF version has been in color for quite some time, but we were able to work out something with our printer that is financially possible for us to do these issues in full color print now. So if you have feelings or comments or just some feedback to share about that, feel free to get in touch with me through editor@hornsociety.org. We are getting close to the 56th International Horn Symposium and also the International Horn Competition of America, two really big events in the horn playing world that are both going to be held consecutively, first the IHCA and then the IHS Symposium at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, hosted by Dr. John McGuire. If you've not checked out his podcast episode, be sure to do that for lots of information about IHS 56 and the IHCA. Another bit of news, if you checked out the January 2024 episode of the podcast, you probably heard that we are now doing ads. So if that's something you're interested in doing, if you're a business out there that works in the horn playing community and you'd like to share some of your information through the podcast, feel free to get in touch with me or with our ad agent, Paul Austin. And I think that's all of the sort of top of the show announcements. And let's get on to my guest today. Quite often on this podcast, I enjoy speaking to people I hadn't really known before, other than professionally, just through their recordings and perhaps former students or teaching, that sort of thing. But in this case, my guest on the podcast is a good friend of mine, a colleague. I've known him for over 20 years, so over 2 decades now, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I first met Bernhard Scully when we both started our graduate degrees at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2002. And of course, a lot of people in the horn world know Bernhard through his work with the Canadian Brass. He's on the faculty at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He's been performed with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, with the Minnesota Orchestra, and just had a globe-spanning career as a soloist, teacher, and clinician. He's also a really great guy. It was a really fun chat we had today. It was nice of us to catch up, with Bernhard and talk about all of the things that he's been doing. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Bernhard Scully. And I don't change very much at all from when maybe that's to my detriment. I don't really change much once the recording starts versus when we're off. But thanks again for joining me today. And we were just chatting before we started recording about maybe a good place to start would be to talk about this recent music festival that you just attended. You were a performer and a teacher. Was it in South America or somewhere, if I remember correctly?
South America, it was Argentina. Well, firstly, I'd say thank you so much for having me, James. It's an honor to be in this podcast, and it's just really good to see you and always good to talk to you. And so thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I just got back from this festival. It's in Argentina, which is a country in South America, and it lasts for about a week. It's called the Isla Verde Bronces Brass Festival.
Okay.
And I have been doing it since 2018, before the pandemic.
Mm.
The person who organized is Luis Isaiah. He is from this little town called Isla Verde. For those of you, I live in the heartland of America in Illinois here, surrounded by cornfields. And it's almost like if the town nearest us in Urbana, this little town called Farmer City, it's almost like if they had an international brass festival.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I know. And so, I mean, just imagine this. So if you live in the farmland and some little farm community all of a sudden has an international brass festival where it invites faculty from literally all over the world. Like this, in this instance, there were two of us from the United States. There were one from Northern Ireland and then one from the UK mainland, and then one Argentinian on the brass faculty, plus staff and some conductors. So, and then we all come together in this little tiny town, and all the students are from all over South America, essentially. Like almost all the countries are represented. Number of them from Argentina, some from Chile, Venezuela, Peru, Honduras, Brazil, Uruguay. It's like they all come long distance to go to this festival. And it's just a celebration of brass. I think it is one of my favorite things I've ever done as a musician. I think it's maybe my favorite brass festival I've ever been a part of. One of the interesting things about it, so you get to stay with residents of this little town, all of whom support this festival to no end. Like it's almost like the whole town is in on it,
Oh, wow.
It's really cool. Yeah. Yeah. And so you stay in someone's residence, you get to know them very well. Oftentimes the language divide is very high. I don't know if you speak Spanish, but I certainly don't. I've been trying. I've been on Duolingo for 430 days. It didn't help me very much in South America. I need to take a class, but I've known some words. But their English oftentimes is not very fluid, and obviously most of our Spanish is not very fluid. But it doesn't matter because everybody's working to get along. So you live there, and then you really are immersed in the culture of the town. So the food, the local dancing, the local music scene, which even though it's a very small town, there is tons of live music happening at little bars and things in the evening.
Oh, wow.
Amazing musicians. Yeah, it's really incredible.
So you teach lessons and master classes during the day, and is there like a brass choir or an orchestra or?
Yeah, not orchestra. It's only brass.
Okay.
So it's just the main brass instruments. So during the day, basically you have a little warm up for the students. Each faculty kind of oversees their instrument. So I'm with the horns only for the week. And about 4 hours in the mornings, do some warm ups. Then you listen to them play in a masterclass setting. They bring whatever solo or things they're working on. You just kind of talk to them. It's quite a free form. They let you do it however you want. I've kind of structured it differently each year I've gone back, to kind of like remembering what I did the previous year to make it a little more structured. Then usually you play, like in this instance, we got put in a faculty brass quintet.
Oh, cool.
So it was really fun. So the faculty this time around was Mary Elizabeth Bowden, who was the founder of Seraph Brass. I had not met her before. She's a really amazing trumpet player in person. Dante, he was Argentinian. He was a longtime student at the festival, and now he plays in one of the primary orchestras in Buenos Aires. So he came on faculty, kind of like coming up through the ranks, which is really cool. And then Brett Baker on trombone, who plays in the Black Dyke Mills band, who I'd heard about for years, but just a really amazing. And then Les Neisch, who's a amazing tuba soloist. So we all just were put in this brass quintet, and we all chose a piece for it, and we got to rehearse each day, and then play a couple performances over the week. So that was really fun. And then there was a brass choir, and also all the instruments formed their own choirs. So I had a horn choir. And then the concerts are in the evening time, usually a little bit later. They say 8:30, oftentimes they start at 9. So going till whenever, and it's so fun. There was another group there called Die Brass Ensemble, which is a Argentinian brass group. It's basically 2 trumpets, a rotary valve flugelhorn, actually.
Oh, wow.
And all forward fit, and trombone. Yeah, trombone and xylophone. and they play essentially
That's interesting.
Argentinian music. Yeah, it's like a really
Okay.
full-blown Argentinian brass ensemble. They are well known in Argentina. They were the resident ensemble. So
Okay.
it's a lot of activity in the week. The students are amazing. I love working with them. The faculty was great. Get to eat a lot of, asado. If you're vegetarian, it's going to be kind of hard. But I don't know. I just think it's really cool to have that kind of cultural immersion.
Mm-hmm.
You get in contact with people that do things really differently. The students, the faculty. It's like, I don't know. It's hard to describe. I mean, going till 5 a.m. sometimes the live music will happen, and you'll
oh my goodness,
get to see the people singing folk music. Some of the students, they get up there. One of the horn players, professional horn player in Argentina, he's actually a famous folk singer as well. And said he would be up there 5:30. I'll send you a video to show. Gustavo, if you're listening, Gustavo, hi. Yeah, so it's just, I don't know, it's just it's something that, like all of us in the faculty, we talk about how a festival like that almost seems incomprehensible in some ways, at least where I live. I mean, maybe in Louisiana, I don't know, you got some good music down there, so maybe people might be. I can't conceptualize a festival like this in the way it happens,
right?
Organic, kind of culturally immersive way, happening almost anywhere. So I'm very grateful to be a part of it, and I don't know how much longer. I mean, he's asked me to do it a number of times, and they've had other horn professors before, but I've just been fortunate to go down for about half a decade now and really get to know the students and the people of the town. A lot of really good friends, and just really good people. So
yeah, well, all the horn players I've ever heard from, like Central and South America, I've been extremely impressed by. I mean, just the quality of playing is, just really, really higher than, I mean, we kind of get insulated in the United States sometimes and think about, sort of the American way of horn playing. And that's kind of, if you go to school in this country, that's kind of how you're trained in this way of playing things. And then it's so nice to get to hear, at like international symposiums and at festivals like that one, you just get to hear such a broad array of, there's more than one way to do it. And there's more than one way to do it really well.
Oh, absolutely. And even like aesthetic values, like within the playing, you hear people playing in a certain way that maybe if you were to play that way in an American school of music, they might tell you not to do it that way.
Right.
But they're doing it. It's just this kind of it just shows you how subjective the art form is, and how there's really infinite modalities of excellence in anywhere you go. And so, yeah, I agree. I think it's really good to get out. I met this one fellow a couple of years ago. I didn't see him this year, but he essentially writes his own music. I'll share his CD with you after the interview. But it's like his own take on like a lot of like Kilprush, Mozart, these things, but in a very Argentinian way. And it kind of reminded me of Arkady Shoklover, actually.
Oh, how interesting.
I think he was very inspired by Arkady. And Arkady actually, prior to the pandemic, there usually were 2 teachers, and that's where I got to, Arkady was one of the teachers once.
Oh, okay.
So the 2 of us, and then Radagundis Tavares, was there. That's where I knew Arkady from a ways back, but with Radagundis, that's the first time I met him. So that, it tends to draw a real variety. Lewis kind of just gets all these different people who do things differently down there. And there's a real openness to that. Even from a pedagogical standpoint, we can think about performing standpoints, and IHS, oftentimes that's those conventions you see people perform, but it's sometimes a rarity to be able to learn from people who do things, maybe diametrically differently or something, or have different values. That's a really special thing, I think.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, I was telling you before we started, the hard thing about the interview today is going to be like, well, what do we talk about? Because there's so many things we could talk about. We've known each other a long, long time. We go way back to University of Wisconsin-Madison. I started there the same time you did, fall of 2002. So it's been a minute, as they say.
It's been a bit. It seems like yesterday, but it really wasn't.
It really does. I have some really clear memories of, we played in a horn quartet together, and I didn't realize it at the time. It was pretty intimidating, not just, to be there with you, but to be with other players who were clearly in a lot of ways way ahead of me. And I felt like at first I was just like, oh my gosh, I don't know if, I had that imposter syndrome of like, I don't know if I even belong here. And then it's that process of sort of, we got comfortable with each other. I think that was one of the things about that studio, and lots of studios are like this, successful ones are, but there's a level of support from the other studio members. We all kind of, our successes are shared and our failures are also shared. We supported each other through good and bad. And I mean, so I think that
Yep.
in a lot of ways that really shaped my approach to playing and teaching. I imagine it did for you as well.
Oh my gosh, those 2 years in Madison. I mean, really, I lived there for 2.5 years,
Mm-hmm.
but the time there, it was a monumentally important time in my life. I mean, I don't think I would have the career I have now or anything without that time, being in school with you and working with Doug and just all of it was so important to my life. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think so. Clearly, Doug Hill's teaching is a big influence in your life, and then maybe talk a little bit about the influence of Kendall Betts, because I knew like when you got to UW, it was like, okay, this guy's coming in. He's basically been playing professionally already, and was like, oh my god, like that's who I'm in school with. But you'd done some playing already, and I think a lot of that had to do with you'd taken lessons quite a bit with Kendall Betts, and you'd been involved with the horn camp, coming up through high school and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I mean, I just look at back in my life and think, I, Kendall was my teacher in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I had moved back with my mom and brother to Minneapolis. We had lived in Georgia, but we moved back my last 2 years in high school. I was looking for a horn teacher,
Mm.
and I had seen him for the first time because the 1993 horn convention was in Tallahassee, and my
Okay.
teacher in Georgia had taken me for a day to go to the convention. It was the
Mm-hmm.
only one I'd ever been to at the time, and at that time, I mean, they still probably do this on some. I don't think they do it as much actually. They had these marathon concerts where they would kind of feature like all the artists on the roster on like one concert.
Oh, maybe like a
And the
finale
concert would be like
concert or
three.
something. Yeah.
Well, this was like in the middle of the week, and it was like there was like two of these in the day actually.
Oh wow.
If I remember correctly, it's so long. Yeah, like I mean, on one concert, I think I saw it's like Kendall played, Chuck Kavalowski, Bill Purvis, Barry Tuckwell, Jeffrey Bryant. Like it was like,
Oh my goodness.
Frank Lloyd. Like it was like Freudis Verker. Like all these people
Right.
played. It must have been like a 3 or 4 hour concert of something. I just got to just sit there to watch them. It was amazing, and then that's when the Kendall was one of the artists.
Okay.
So, and I knew I was going to be moving, and so I kind of looked at the name. Oh, this probably should get in contact with him. So then I contacted him over the summer, and he said he would consider teaching me. And so
Okay.
he became my teacher of my last 2 years of high school. And I mean, those were two, again, pivotal years. He was not an easy teacher. He didn't have many students, but I was very eager to learn. So he hit me over the head with Cope Rush. That was for sure.
I was gonna say what was the typical lesson with what was the typical lesson with him like?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I just tell you my first lesson. So I was 16. I mean, all I wanted to do at that point, because I didn't have a symphony to play in Georgia, I just wanted to play in a symphony.
Okay.
So the Twin Cities had a youth symphony program,
Mm-hmm.
very robust actually. And I was kind of intimidated because I thought, like, I just hope I get in one of the orchestras because I would love to play in a symphony. And so I practiced all summer. I went to music camp, practiced all summer, was preparing this music. And I took the audition and I got in the top symphony. And I was
Awesome.
like on cloud 9, not to brag. I mean, I didn't think I would. And I got the top symphony. I was really, really happy. And then the next day I had my first lesson with him. And I was just, that kind of, I have a little bit of swagger at that point. Like I'm doing everything right. And I go in the lesson and he has me kind of warm up downstairs, but he had this soundproof room that had zero resonance. Like it was like a closet, basically,
Sure.
with carpeting on the walls, and that's where we practiced. And so I was kind of playing, and it just didn't feel very good in there. So he came down and he sat in his chair. The first thing he did was he lit up a cigarette.
And you were a 16, 17-year-old at the time?
Yeah, a 16-year-old kid.
Yeah.
I'd been told that, smoking not only was bad for you, but
Right.
sure, definitely don't do it if you're a brass player. And here's this guy in this small room without even any air filtration system, like, just lights up a cigarette. I'm just like, oh, okay. He's like, what are you going to play? And I said, I got the Strauss concerto. So I played the Strauss concerto, and it wasn't my best. It wasn't quite as good as the day before, but it wasn't bad. I mean, now I think back on that, I probably played pretty okay for a 16-year-old. And he just, like, smoking a cigarette. He's like, yeah, that piece is too hard for you. So why don't you look at open up the Koprush book on the stand. I want to hear you do a long tone on C, and then we'll see if we can get to the Koprush number 1. And I'm thinking, like, what? Like, this is, I thought I was having an out of body experience or something.
Sure.
And not that I wasn't like expecting special treatment or anything, but I was definitely not expecting to be brought down to like ground zero, at this meeting, which it was. It was pretty intensely humbling. And so it was just all of that whole lesson. It was like 3 hours long. It was on a Saturday morning. He didn't have anything else going on. He just kept me there for like 3 hours. He had a baseball bat. He's like pushing it against my stomach. Burns calories to play the horn, I'm just like, just like getting high on cigarette smoke. And I don't even remember like exactly. I mean, I just remember I was there for 3 hours. We played Koprush 1. I don't know what happened. And I just remember my like basically like my mom picked me up. I called my mom to pick me up. She's like, oh, it's a little later than I thought. Yeah, it's okay. And she came in, and I actually started crying. I was like, oh, he's so mean. I don't know if I'm ever going to go back to him, And then, but the thing about it was, like, I really had never had anybody talk to me like that before. Again, I wasn't looking for special treatment. I didn't think I had that big of an ego, but I definitely was ambitious and very serious as a student at that point. I was definitely looking for someone to help me. And I was angry. Like, honestly, like, I was like, no one talks to me like that. I'm going to go back in 2 weeks and show this guy that I can play Koprush 1 through 4. Like he asked me to, the way he told me to, he wrote it all in. And I did. I practiced like every day, basically memorized that stuff and brought it in the next lesson. And I remember him sitting there. I just kind of ran through it all. And he was just sitting there smoking his cigarette. And he's like, okay.
That was what passed for praise, I think, probably.
He did. He over the course of those 2 years studying, he maybe gave me like a compliment here or there or something. But
okay, so if we're sharing Kendall stories, can I share one with you too?
Yes, yeah, please, yeah.
And
that's not my first lesson.
He rest in peace. I mean, he is certainly one of the large personalities in the horn world, and we have no shortage of them. But he was certainly a large personality.
And I should say, I mean, lest anybody think I don't think highly of him. I mean, he became my mentor over time.
Right. Yeah.
And, one of my primary mentors, my closest friends, really almost like a father figure to me, even though this beginnings was a little tenuous,
Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah.
I love the guy. I miss him, but I thought so go ahead, share your story.
No. And I think, we could form a little club and talk about, that the Kendall Betts experience at Kendall Betts Horn Camp during the first master class in the morning. And okay, we're going to play Koprush 1. Or I think he went around, everybody was kind of sitting on the couches and stuff in his cabin. Yeah. It's like, okay, play something. What are you going to play? And my experience with Kendall Betts at the camp was, we're just all in there for this first master class, and I'd never been before. I was excited to be there, and I knew some people. You were there. You were on the faculty at the time, and this was in 2004.
Oh my gosh! Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Back.
And it's we went around and played like little excerpts or etudes or whatever, and Kendall just would critique it a little bit. And I don't know what happened. I wasn't really paying much attention after I played. It's one of those things like, okay, I got my thing out of the way, and now I'm just going to wait till it's time to do something again. But before I knew it, he was like screaming at somebody else about something because the person had like smarted off to him about something, and I don't know what it was, but that and I didn't have nearly as much experience with him as you did, but clearly the guy was just a monster player. He had kind of an
Yeah.
intuitive way of playing the horn. I remember him saying just kind of offhandedly one way, like, yeah, I can kind of just pick up any horn and kind of just figure out how to play it pretty quickly. And he would even do that on some of those concerts. He would play like kind of garbage instruments or something and just make them work. And it's like, I wish I had had time to ask him, like, how do you do that? And he may have not even known how he did it. He just could kind of figure out how whatever instrument he had in his hands would just kind of
Well,
work.
I think he did know. I think that was really the core of his teaching, was that, playing the horn or a brass instrument came down to just really simple fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he pushed over and over and over again. That's really a lot what the camp was about. Was he
Mm-hmm.
had come across a lot of players over the years, like at horn conventions and whatnot, and through his teaching, that he sensed really desired to play well. And they were trying to play the repertoire, and they were trying to do all this and that. But he just knew they just did not have really any what you call fundamental understanding of mechanics of playing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the reasons he founded that camp, was
Mm-hmm.
to provide essentially a service to people, to just show them very clearly, like, it's not rocket science. It's just these couple things. And he had his own way of doing it, of course, his own style.
Yes. Yes. That's the word. Yes.
He was endearing, it could be very intense. It oftentimes shocked a lot of people who were not expecting it. But no, he really wanted, I think he really wanted to help people. He really had a desire. He wanted to see people succeed and have the ability to play the instrument and
Mm-hmm.
experience the joy of the instrument. And so he had a lot of self-awareness, I think, in terms of his playing. So that's why I just wanted to mention, I think he did. I think one of the reasons he could do that was because he did understand himself very well as a player,
Mm-hmm.
and how he could just carry that through to any instrument, basically. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then, so from there, you went to Northwestern, right? And you studied some with Clevenger, some with Dale Clevenger, and then with Gail Williams as well after that, right?
Yeah, my first year, I had a couple of lessons with Dale, like in high school, and I was kind of, interested in studying with him. And so when I got to school, luckily for me, there were just this array of amazing players and teachers. So my first teacher there was Dale, for the first year, just the first 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'd probably call him my primary teacher. He was really good for me, like sort of from a coaching standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Kendall had already kind of taught me how to play the horn,
Mm-hmm.
how to be a musician. Dale was very good with like the repertoire,
Mm-hmm.
coaching orchestral excerpts and kind of like getting the Chicago style. Obviously, that was why so many people went to study with him.
Sure.
I think and then I had the good fortune of studying with Roland Pandolfi, who was in the St. Louis Symphony at the time.
Oh, okay.
My second year there,
Okay.
because Dale was no longer on the faculty, and that he actually ended up being a really important teacher for me. He kind of he was a very intuitive teacher. He took the concepts of Arnold Jacobs and could really translate them to the students well.
Oh.
Like he had a pedagogical ability like that, and plus he demonstrated. He also played in a way I had not really heard. He had this sort of a real vocal, a lighter approach to horn playing that I had not come across.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a little bit like a Bauman or something.
Sure.
That kind of more soloistic kind of playing. He encouraged me to use vibrato in my playing, which I had not really considered. Although I did kind of have a natural vibrato, but I was almost trying not to use it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, "Yeah, you should try that." He was a great teacher. I remember one of the funniest quotes from him. At that point, I was a pretty serious student. He'd be like, "Come on, Bernhard. What do you do for fun?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know. I hang out with my friends. I practice the horn." He's like, No. You got to have some wine, have some pasta,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, yeah. He got me just to really loosen up and relax, think musically. And I think he really helped me with my sound concept, and certainly with just my approach to the instrument.
Uh-huh.
Really pivotal teacher for me. And then I would say my primary teacher in undergraduate, my last 2 years, was Gail Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Was one of my primary mentors.
Okay.
On many levels. So,
yeah. And it's that's quite a pedigree, but it's you don't even really think about it when you're doing it. You're just trying to you're trying to learn as much as you can from every person that you kind of come into contact with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just, whoever I was working with, I just tried to learn as much as I could. I was always practicing. I had a lot of things to work through, and I certainly, had a lot of, I had not solved all my issues or worked through all the dilemmas in that at that time in my life. I was very much working through that. That's when I came in contact also with our Alexander technique, which
Mm-hmm.
became really pivotal for me as an artist to
Mm-hmm.
kind of work through some of my tensions and work through some of just body mechanics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we also took a Feldenkrais class together at UW. I don't know if you
We
remember
did.
being in that class with me. That's
Oh
also
yeah.
another excellent type of sort of somatic or body learning type discipline. That's very good to get into.
Yuri was so great. I remember his
Mm-hmm.
wife was she worked with us too. I loved that class, and it really, because I had also taken Alexander technique, it really kind of further informed
Mm-hmm.
for me,
Yep.
having both of those perspectives. I think Feldenkrais was a protege of Alexander, actually.
Yeah, they diverged a little bit after a certain point, but yeah, I think that they kind of had roots together. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I was talking with Tommy Huttinen from Finland, and he's sort of like into Pilates, and that's kind of something that he's talks about in his teaching is just sort of that kind of strength from the core and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very related.
Yeah,
Definitely. I have not
yeah.
done Pilates very much, but I've heard a lot of people do it. I probably should do it.
There's only so many hours in the day, but
That's right. That's right. I
yeah.
forgot you had taken that class too. I mean, I love that class, that Feldenkrais class. That was great.
Yeah, yeah. I remember grad school it was a time of intense focus as it is for, I mean, why else go to grad school, right? Unless you're there to kind of focus on the thing you want to do. But then it was also this opportunity to like, oh, I've never taken a jazz improv class before. I think I will. That was what I think made that particular grad program pretty special, as you were not kind of put into a narrow kind of, okay, this is now the path you're going to follow from now till graduation. I think it was pretty encouraged that you could explore different avenues. Like I remember you took some composition lessons, which was not required at all for your degree, and you seemed to get a lot out of that. And we took the jazz improv class, which was definitely not required for the degree.
Yep.
But it was, I mean, those were some of the most memorable experiences I have outside of obviously the horn playing and stuff. But like, oh yeah, being in that Feldenkrais class or taking a jazz improv class.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that, for grad school, Gail, who I've always trusted implicitly, and she knew me so well. When I was asking about like, well, where should I consider for grad school? And I was kind of like saying some schools, and she's like, you really should study with Doug. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, I already knew he was great. And a lot of the students that came to Northwestern were his students. I saw just the great teaching that he obviously did. So I was already kind of thinking of that, because she had, really pointed me towards it. But so you had mentioned, like, I got the chance to play professionally before I came. And so I was very lucky when I graduated from Northwestern. I really didn't know what I was going to do. I was going to just kind of take a little break from school. But right away, I started getting some gigs. I had some part-time positions, and then I started to become a regular substitute with the Minnesota Orchestra, because they had a vacancy. And it basically turned into me playing almost every week, actually, for like 3 years. So it was like a basic full-time job, and I played mostly second horn and assistant horn, but occasionally some of the other positions. So I really got to learn. I mean, it was like, 2001 touching the monolith for me, I was arguably not quite ready to enter that level of playing, but I learned pretty quickly. But I think in so doing, I think one of the things that it also let me know for myself is that I really had other interests that I wanted to pursue more, the ones you mentioned. I really wanted to give myself a chance to explore the jazz idiom more. I really wanted to spend more time with my composing, and I really wanted to give myself a chance to pursue my dream of being a soloist, honestly. As crazy as that sounded, but it's like, I started to realize, like, I like the orchestra a lot. It's really fun. But those are the things I think I actually thought that I was good at those things, and I didn't think I was as good at orchestra playing. So I really wanted to go somewhere, but it seemed like that was such against the status quo. I'd mentioned that to somebody, like, what are you, crazy? Why would you not want to do what everybody else is doing?
Right.
That it just wasn't being encouraged. It was kind of hard to find a teacher that would support you doing things outside of the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And Doug was just right there for me. He was just like, yeah, we can do this. I'm with you. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
will support you. He wanted to work with me, and I was so excited. And I read his book before I came in. And that's what I did. I mean, the moment I got there, it was just all about exploring the new things
Mm-hmm.
from day one. I remember I did a recital every single semester. I don't know if you remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I just decided, like, I was going to do a recital all the time, just to learn repertoire and just get myself more familiar with it. And he was like supportive. He probably was thinking like, this guy's nuts, but, but it was just, yeah. And taking all of the jazz classes and the composition classes and everything. And, still got to play in the orchestra. I mean, we played a little bit Madison Symphony.
Mm-hmm.
There were still opportunities for that, but that really was not my focus. Like, I didn't really work on excerpts with Doug or anything. It was just all the new stuff. And we talked a lot about pedagogy, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just kind of got my head in like a different place, and in an immersion for a number of years, kind of put me in a different trajectory in many ways. I didn't even know. I thought initially like I'd just do that for myself, and then I graduate and then kind of go right back into the standard pathways,
Mm-hmm.
Go back, start taking orchestra auditions, whatever. And it actually launched my career in a different way. Honestly.
Well, a little group known as the Canadian Brass gave you a call, right? And
right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I didn't see that one coming, but if I had, even gotten the opportunity to audition for that group 2 years earlier, only having played section in the orchestra with all my previous training, I would have not been remotely prepared. My chops might have been there, but I wouldn't have been mentally poised for that, or even comfortable with the diversity of the genres that we play.
Well, and there's a showmanship aspect to, I mean, any kind of touring group like that. It's not enough to just go out there, sit down and play. I mean, the average audience goer is, they're going to be wowed by great playing, but there's got to be, they have to be entertained. There has to be something to the program that's going to tie in, tie things together for them. And they're going to come walking out of that concert just like on cloud nine. And it's not necessarily just about playing great.
Right. I mean, you do have to play great. I mean, that's the thing, is I think if anyone thinks you can have a successful concert career and not play at a high level, I think that's mistaken. But so it did play great. But at the same time, that was a big learning curve for me, the showmanship thing, because I wasn't used to that. I had gotten to the point where I felt comfortable playing as a soloist, just the repertoire and in front like that, but not connecting to the audience on a much higher level. And I remember talking to the guys in the group, and they told me that really almost from the very inception of the group, they stopped thinking about themselves as brass players per se. They played brass instruments, but they stopped thinking about themselves like in relation to sort of the standard, kind of aesthetic of classical music, so to speak, and the values of classical music, which oftentimes are like, who can play the best, or who can, play this repertoire only. And they just started thinking of themselves more broadly as entertainers, as you say. But they started to kind of create the group for the audience in many ways. They let the audience kind of tell them like what they wanted, and it evolved over time. And that was just a different concept. It didn't have anything to do with being the best, for instance,
right.
Which I think is a really interesting concept in retrospect now, like in the art form. I think that we all kind of have to reckon with in some ways, is this kind of constant vying. It's almost like an ideology of competition that permeates the art form. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but it's, now I can say that because I'm reflective. I don't think I could.
Right. Yeah.
But they kind of had abandoned that. And I think it was one of the primary reasons they were successful. Like, in other words, they weren't just trying to play the hardest music. They weren't just trying to show off on stage. They weren't really trying to be whatever the best even meant. They were just trying to be relevant to their audience and continue to build their audience, play as good as they possibly could. And they were made up of tremendous players, so no debate there. But it was just a different way of looking at things. That I don't think that that had not existed for me, like in my classical training. I think it's almost really hard to talk about that aspect of the business in school in some ways.
Yeah. Well, and then there might be some things that, you can't really learn until you go out there and experience them yourselves. I mean, I guess intellectually someone could tell you about it. Like, here's what it's like to go on the road and play 200 concerts a year or something. But until you've actually done it, it's like, you don't really have any idea of what you're getting into.
Oh no! I mean, I'm glad I didn't, because I don't know if I would have done. It was like, yeah, just don't tell me. That was like Mason Jones' old quote, like "never look back and never look too far ahead" or something.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, I just dived into that thing, and that really changed my life, and that was like the beginning of like the next phase of my life, which here I am.
Well, so I guess I have two questions for you. Let's start with, do you have any stories from the road, like one or two that come to mind over your time with the Canadian Brass? Anything that's kind of funny or kind of something unexpected that you would have never dreamed would have happened on a trip like that?
Oh my gosh, there's just so many. Like that's a hard question, because I mean, the one thing about the group, we were always well taken care of. I mean, it was in some ways the most comfortable I ever felt in any performing setting, because we were just taken good care of. So not a lot of really crazy things happened in some ways, because we were always had mitigating forces that would prevent that. But there were times, I remember when I first joined, the first really big thing I did was do an Asian tour.
Okay.
And I was still living in Madison. I think you're probably still living there too.
Yep.
And Sarah, my wife, is going to go with me. And so we were going to catch the flight in Madison. It was going to take us to Chicago, then LA, then out to Taiwan. Actually, we had to stop in LA to play with the symphony, actually, the Pacific Symphony. So we got to the Madison airport. I think it was like an hour in advance. It wasn't that late. And they wouldn't let us on because it was an international destination in the end. They required more time. So they wouldn't let us on the plane. And I'm thinking, like, please just let me on the plane. Like, you don't understand. Like, right. I can't miss this flight. And so we had to drive to Chicago
to catch the connecting. Yeah.
To try to catch my connecting flight. It was this crazy small window of time we had to do that. And we did it. Like, we actually did. We got the flight, but I'm trying to think now. Something happened where wait, we didn't. Sorry, we didn't make that. That one we didn't. But I got on the flight the next day, and so I ended up missing like the first rehearsal for the symphony. And I'm thinking at this point, like, I'm going to be let go. I'm going to be fired. They're never going to see. They're like, see you later. But I got to the dress rehearsal, I think, with the symphony, and we played the concert, and I was like just really, really kind of shaken up about it. They said, it's okay, just don't let it happen again.
Right. Yeah.
So it was just that moment of like kind of from the sublime to the ridiculous, like how fast something can just completely get off the rails. And because if there's only 5 people in the group, if you're not there, I mean, you can't really get a substitute.
There's 20% of the music. Yeah.
20% of it, and getting a substitute is basically impossible. So it was that moment of like clarity for me of just kind of what I gotten myself into, the level of responsibility for it. So that was one story. And then the Asian trip was really great. That was so fun. We went to all these different countries and went to this all these different markets. I remember eating things like duck blood soup and squid soup that I didn't like them. But it was just,
it's an experience. Yeah, it's an experience.
It's very, everyone was trying new things. And then maybe something else. I mean, I don't know, getting to play with the New York Philharmonic, Philadelphia Orchestra, many other symphony brass sections. All these great concerts we shared. That was just a real honor and highlight for me. I will never forget those things. Doing some of the recordings. I don't know, man. It's a lot of stuff, a lot of memories. I don't think I had a single bad memory. I mean, it was all just so great. And the only downside of that group for me was just, I was married. We wanted to have family, and it was just kind of hard to be gone after a while from people you love. So
sure,
that was the only downside of it, really.
Yeah, and I guess we could get into that talking about like work-life balance and something in just a second, but I was going to sort of tie this back into any students that are listening to this, if you have advice for, you know, being on the road like that and just day in and day out having to deliver these concerts at a high level, as you said, how did you keep your playing in order and, you know, your fundamentals and all that stuff? What I imagine you got really efficient at it. If I'm sure you were efficient before, but I imagine you got really good at like, okay, this is what I need to do on a day-to-day basis just to be able to play this 2-hour, 2.5-hour show, couple, 3 nights, 4 nights in a row.
Yes, that is a great question. That is something I had to learn, especially my first year in the group. I didn't really feel fully comfortable ever in the group until about a year in. That's when I finally started to feel this kind of level of comfort settle in. I started feeling like I just wasn't always freaked out, you know. And the first thing I noticed was I was working too hard. When I first joined, I thought I was pretty efficient as a player, but, you know, tonguing oftentimes too hard, using too much tongue, you know, just making sure I was taking full breaths all the time. So I made little slight equipment adaptations, you know, making sure my mouthpiece was a little easier to play on, honestly. You know, this endurance and stamina were a really big issue with that. So that was a big, and then what I realized too, is you really don't have much time to practice on the road at all. I mean, you can pretty much discount any sort of notion of practicing when you're touring, like carving out an hour and working on stuff. That this was almost non-existent.
Right.
You know, and whenever I tried it, I tire myself out and wish I hadn't done it. You know? You know, so it would really, I mean, you had to get everything had to be ready to go before the tour. So what I would say to anybody is, you know, it really came down to fundamentals. You know, I had to have, if my fundamentals are in place and I had learned the music the best I could before going, I was in a good position. The show itself would keep you in shape.
Right.
You know, Jeff Nelson told me that. Jeff was leaving the group and I joined. He's like, first thing, the show will keep you in shape. You know, definitely warm up and, you know, play for get your face going before the shows. But, you know, you won't have to do a lot of stuff to keep you in shape, because it's a fully exhaustive, extensive amount of playing in that 2-hour show or so.
Yeah, brass quintet playing, brass trio playing, brass quintet playing. I mean, there's little else that's as endurance heavy. I mean, it's just a lot of horn playing.
It is. And then when I come home, that's when I would just hunker down. And every day I do my routine stuff. I do my long tones and etudes. I work out little things in the show. I, you know, would be having maybe a few other concerts on the horizon away from the quintet, a few solo things. So I would kind of strategize that practice away from the touring. So that was, and I had learned a lot of that even in the orchestra up to that point. You learn, if you're playing week in, week out in a professional orchestra, like in any of the positions, you learn pretty quickly, like what you have to focus on.
Right.
And what too much playing is. I mean, I kind of made all the mistakes early on. I played too much and tired, not practiced enough, and, you know, not played just all the things.
Right.
I kind of had worked through that, fortunately. So I'm glad I didn't have to learn that on the road. The other thing too is really just, and all the older guys did this. They said, you know, we don't drink very much. We don't smoke. We meditate every day. I learned Transcendental Meditation when I first joined from Gene Watts, which I still do pretty much every day, which really clears your mind, keeps you rested. It was a way to really just give you energy and focus before the performances, and when you don't get a chance to sleep or rest very much.
Right.
Try to exercise as much as I could and just eat very healthy. You know, so just try to live as healthy as you can, because what you're doing as a musician, because we are the instrument. You know,
right. Yeah.
We are. It's just a little amplification device that we're playing here. You know, we are the instrument. So if we are taken care of as good as we possibly can, mind and body, that's the best we can do. But if you didn't do that, I mean, on the road, I mean, you pay for it. Like if you're in the orchestra in one place, that'd start to eat away at you after a while. But man, on the road, it was, you know, the last thing you want to do is have to, you know, drink a little bit much and then have to travel the next day and feel terrible.
Right.
Then play a concert.
Ugh,
where you
yeah.
play solos and stuff. Not, get to play a freaking solo when you feel terrible. Like, I just wasn't going to do that to myself.
Right.
I cared too much about my career and the way I played. And so I always try to take the best care of myself. I mean, I'm sure I could do better, but and you remember you and I used to do workouts, I think I was already kind of into that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before grad school, I was already kind of obsessive about, probably too obsessive, but
No, and I mean, we were talking before we started recording. This aging thing is real interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Just this idea of, you're you inside your head, right? But then there's this, the physical and other things going on. It's like the years change, and then your body changes, and then your outlook on things change, and then it's something we all have to come to grips with.
Yeah, I mean, and I know I'm curious to see what you say about how you feel you've changed. For me, the thing that probably changed me the most as a person was, I think, having kids, actually, of all the things, because it was that moment in my life where I thought, I absolutely no longer am just living for myself or only my spouse or something like that. I am really doing everything now for these little people, Everything I say to them, I have to know why it was just that moment of like personal reflection and accountability that just shifted everything. I mean, teaching, I think, has changed me a lot over the years as well, like working with all the students. I'm sure you feel that. Traveling has changed me a lot, but having, overseeing little people and kind of like raising them up and wanting to do the right thing as a parent, I think that changed, because it really puts your priorities in place.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
It sets them. It makes you realize that one little missed note you had, maybe it wasn't as important as you thought.
Yeah. And, the age tends to mellow most people, at least in my experience. And that's for the better generally. It's you learn to take the things that don't matter as much and just chill a little bit.
Learning to value time with friends and family. That's a huge thing for me. I love my time I spend now. Whereas when I was in my 20s, I probably wasn't thinking about that. I was just thinking like, I've got to do this. I just was so in, which I think is normal too, but it's probably not the healthiest, but I think it's, it's kind of necessary in our society right now to almost think that way. But boy, friends and family, priceless.
Well, and I can't imagine being the age that college students are now, dealing with the level of distractions that are available. I mean, the internet was a thing, obviously, and, there were cell phones and computers and all that stuff, but just the level of scrutiny, there's a weight that I see on some students' shoulders, just even like choosing a college major. Like they just think that, this one decision I make is going to affect the outcome of the rest of my life. And I try to encourage them. It's like, this is not the only decision you'll have to make in your life. I mean, you pick a major and it is what it is. And if you end up changing your major, it's okay. It's not the end of the world.
Well, your students are very lucky that you give them that advice. I try to give them similar advice. You're right. It's every day is a new day, and we should never really feel. I mean, like Kendall told me once early on, I think it was like my mid-20s, because I was still very much doing the same thing. He's like, well, Bernhard, there's a point of no return. I was like, oh, really? He was like, he was kind of being silly, but he's not totally. After you invest yourself a certain level in something,
sure,
hard to turn, like, just completely stop. I mean, some people do, but it's at that point you're like, I think I'm really in. But I think you have a long time before you get to that point in your life and your career, and you can always change. And people should just do, I think, what makes them happy.
Right. Yep.
That's what I think.
Yeah. And it's, again, at that age, if you think when you're 18, 19 years old, having to imagine trying to make a decision that you think is going to have, ramifications the next 30 years of your life or something. It's like, I would lock up too. I wouldn't be able to make a decision.
It's hard living in the moment. I mean, the horn itself, I think people nowadays, there's this ever, the growing worry of what's the relevance of like the acoustic instruments, and then
right, or classical music at all, or art music at all. Yeah.
Whatever it is. And obviously, horn is a form of technology. It's an older form of technology, but it's not irrelevant. I think, though, to play the horn, if there was whatever your goal with the instrument is, just to spend time kind of learning the instrument and adapting yourself, hearing the sound, just that kind of integrating you have to do with the instrument in real time. There is no magic button. There is no, matrix-like neck injection that we can do, to learn this thing. It's going to keep us in the here and now. It's very meditative, actually. That is, I think it's a very wonderful thing to have in our current society, which tends to value this kind of technological omnipotence, which we all know doesn't really exist, So I think the horn itself and a lot of instruments, most classical instruments for that matter, they, if anything, are good counterforces for that technological encroachment that you're talking about, which I do worry about a lot. I see my kids suffering with it sometimes.
This is true. And then there's the you could kind of expand that to talk about the value of the humanities in general, the idea of not having all the answers immediately. The humanities and art makes you deal with questions that don't have a definite answer, and that's quite different than some other disciplines, right? And I think people in the sort of pure sciences side, they see the value of humanities and arts because that's something they may not necessarily get if you're looking at ones and zeros all the time.
I agree. And one of the really fascinating things for me about working in a university setting, and you might feel this way too, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is we talk about interdisciplinary work a lot. I think that's elusive to people. I don't know in your school if that's common. We talk about it, but I don't see it.
It's a buzzword. Yeah, it's a buzzword.
yeah, and it's but what I've seen now is this kind of space that we're in at the university. You can begin to deal with music in a different way. Like I was mentioning, sort of that ideology of competition that I think does override a lot of the vocational elements of the art form. It's kind of like, well, I have to learn these certain pieces and I have to be put in this arena to do these very specific things. And then I will be apparently successful, in that, which may or may not be true. That to me, it's fine, but it's certainly not the totality of what music is.
Right.
By any means. It's not by any measure whatsoever. And if that's the only way music is taught, for instance, it's unlikely that we would probably have cross-disciplinary projects, because we're so siloed off in that sort of way of teaching. Again, not that it's bad, but it's just music can be taught in different ways. I think, Doug was really one of the people that taught me that, taught me how to look at music in multiple ways. And one of the things I've done, I don't know, you and I haven't talked about it very much. So when I stopped touring in 2018. I got in tenure at the university, so I felt much more safe. I decided to start to do improvisation more in my lessons. I don't know if you do any of that in your lessons.
We've done some things from Jeff Agrell's books, and it's been really fun. I mean, there's always that first lesson with it. Their student looks at you like, "What? What are you talking about? I can play whatever?" Or
right. It's always that first. They're like mind blown, right? Yeah, it's really because I think what happens is most of the students coming in have been taught under the paradigm we were referring to before of music means reading notes from the page. It means playing things either correctly or incorrectly. It means learning specific pieces. It means always in relation to a large ensemble or something, none of which is bad, of course. But it really has, the way they're taught has nothing to do with like music in a conversational way, for instance.
Right. Yep.
Or music in a just purely creative way, which I would argue almost all music we play is born out of even, So it's a kind of in some ways, a strange way to teach music that we have evolved in our current educational system. That's kind of this traditional classical training. And so by the time they get to college, as you say, when you ask them to improvise on something, say like 3 notes, and they look at you like, what?
Which 3? Yeah. Which one do you want me to play first? Yeah.
How do I know if I'm doing it right?
Yeah.
Or how, these kind of questions. I mean, because it's a different, you're now allowing them to think for the first time, probably
Mm-hmm.
about music in a different way that they never knew they could unless they were in sort of a environment that encouraged that, which I find is very rare, actually.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
not anybody's fault. It's just it's kind of the hegemonic way of doing things, actually.
Well,
So,
and some of it has to do with the pressure. I mean, and again, I'm not making light of students wrestling with the decisions they have to make in college because it is so expensive now. I mean,
right.
just the financial obligation involved in even, a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree, what have you, is just so different now than it was even 10, 15 years ago.
Sure. I mean, someone told me, back in the 90s at the University of Illinois, I think it was like half of all tuition monies came from tax allocated dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now it's like
Yeah.
6%,
Yep.
5%.
Yep. That's consistent with what I'm hearing in a lot of other places. So, yeah.
Keeps on going down. I mean, it really is a sort of a corporatism that has overtaken academia currently. I mean, it could change. There's political will to change it. I don't see that political will happening. But anyways, you're talking about the improvisation, but it's good because then the students would, when I started to do that, what we do now is we really do some like every lesson.
Mm-hmm.
I just decided that I can no longer like other this kind of thinking. We have to kind of center this kind of thinking in many ways to make it seem normal.
Right. Yeah. That's the idea, is it's not something extra. It's music. Yeah.
I think it's even a reclaiming of our Western tradition. Like really, like think about Beethoven, Bach, all the classical composers. They all were composer, improviser, performers. That's
right.
Their existence, sometimes even more.
Right.
And then like in the late 1800s, for all sorts of contextual reasons, it was just sort of taken out. Like we don't need to do this improvising anymore. And now you just play horn. You just play this music. Now it's all about technical perfection and rendering of the pieces of the past.
Right, like being a museum, yeah.
Conservatory being the apropos name.
Right, you're conserving this art, yeah.
Yeah, again, nothing wrong with that, but it's like I think to base the totality of the teaching in that, I do think there's a bit of a danger, because it leaves out this whole thing. So anyways, that was I mentioned that just because when I started to do that, it started to kind of change the culture of the horn studio somewhat. One of the first things it began doing is, I think, kind of breaking down some of the implicit hierarchies, like even in the lesson setting, that we don't think we think about sometimes. We're kind of, as teachers, we have more power than we even think, because the students really look up to us. But now if you make music, if you're just improvising with somebody, what you're telling the student is like, I really value your thoughts and ideas about music, even if it's just on 3 notes, where they may have never been told that before. And now they feel like a little more agency, and you're making music with them. And it really kind of, for at least that moment, kind of breaks down that hierarchy. And if you do that for long periods of time, I think it actually changes the culture. And what I found, I wanted to talk a little bit about this book that I have that's going to come out probably in a couple
years. Yeah. I was just going to ask, you should write a book.
Right. I said, well, so when I started to do this, one of the freshman students was an engineering student here, and she asked me if she could be in the horn studio. She played great. I was like, of course. I've been highly encouraging of non-music majors to take lessons, because I just like teaching them. And she was very averse to this improvising. When we first started doing it, especially as an engineer, of course, and as a gymnast too. So it's like all these things which are
very structured. Yeah.
Highly rigid, highly competitive,
Yeah.
And now, so we went around and around, but eventually by the end of that first semester, she was even writing her own music, because she would just start doing things in her horn that she liked, and she would kind of tongue in cheek call it the goofing off method of horn playing, which I loved. I was like, that's so perfect. And then we ended up like collaborating. Then she ended up introducing me to her mentor in engineering, and we put in for this proposal a couple of years ago, got this proposal that gave us money to travel around the world. We went to South America, to Bolivia, to learn indigenous music from Aymara people, who were some of the longest standing people in Bolivia on the high Andean plain. Similar to the Quechuan culture, but slightly different, actually. And then we also got to go to Sierra Leone to learn music from Mende and Temne people, both indigenous groups. This is something that if you would have asked me back in Madison, like, will you be traveling the world learning indigenous music from people? I'd be like, what? No. But it was just because I think what happened when, both in the engineering realm and in the music realm, when you begin to open things up and allow creativity to flourish more, it really made a much more seamless way of integrating seemingly unintegratable things.
Yes. Yeah.
So now we're integrating on this project, and then it ended up becoming, we co-edited this book. I wrote a chapter, Jessica, my student, wrote a chapter, and the engineer wrote a chapter and a forward, and we had a bunch of all of our collaborators, some artists and some engineers, wrote little chapters in the book as well. And it really, that's been a really life-changing thing for me here at the university, because it kind of made me realize how powerful music really is, actually.
Mm-hmm.
If you let it be. It doesn't, most of it doesn't have to just be about playing the best.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, music can be so much more in some ways.
Yeah. It's a social thing. I mean, it's not, we tend to look at things in, I guess, Western society of what's the end goal, where we going, A leads to B leads to C. But then, I mean, most music in the world isn't meant to be like that.
It's true. Yeah. It's varies. I mean, we're really in the minority in terms of those of us that practice Western classical music, again, which I love. There's nothing against it. It's a very unusual thing in relation to probably 90% of the rest of the world's music making.
Mm-hmm.
And I really feel like now what's exciting is starting to allow, at least in the horn studio, us to experience that kind of music making more,
mm-hmm.
namely through improvisation, like just playing with each other, jamming, just the things that most people do in music. And I think actually the crazy thing is it makes their classical playing even better.
Yep. Less restricted. Yeah.
They're thinking like creators now. They're no longer just playing Mozart, but now they can think like the composer and
mm-hmm.
understand the music from that standpoint. I think it's a way to teach, there's some people that say like, well, you can't teach somebody how to be musical or expressive. That's just an innate thing. You can't, I'm like, I've always been suspect of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. You can't tell somebody how to do that. That's almost an oxymoron. But I think you can bring it out of them,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Through allowing their thoughts and ideas to matter and for them to experience that, which is, again, kind of like education, Latin for like bringing out,
Yeah.
It's not just putting, a lot of the stuff I got from Jeff Agrell. And I mean, I'm just parroting my mentors, but it's really cool to see it when it's in action. I know you've been involved with lots of this stuff. So
no, but I don't think anybody's quite taken that step of working with someone in a STEM field in quite that same way. And it's a credit to both you and your colleague on the engineering side that that you saw the potential of something like that, and that you had the will and the the determination to make it happen. Because we were talking about this a little before. There's lots of ideas out there. People have lots of ideas for, this is how we fix this, and this is how to make this and that better. But it's the rare people that can go out and make it happen.
Well, it wasn't easy. It was Anne's idea initially. Well, the first thing that happened, I should just tell you, I joined this group on campus called the Global STEAM, STEAM. I'm sure you've heard of this, because we think of STEM, but STEAM has the A in it.
Right.
And I didn't have anybody in the arts for the STEAM. And then, so my student was the student rep in the thing, and then Anne's leading it. And they're like, would you want to be the artistic representative? And I just thought, sure. I don't know what I can contribute, but I will be happy. I think my big issue is I just don't say no, right? It gets me in trouble sometimes, but it also leads to interesting pathways.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm part of this, this group, and it's just a bunch of faculty that are trying to make the world a better place. I'm thinking I think I could probably, contribute to this a little bit. And then Anne was really interested, and she kind of encouraged me for us to put our heads together to think of a project, and we call it the Consilience project. Consilience meaning sort of a connection or a thought alignment, like seeing pathways where you didn't think there was in seemingly disparate things. So seemingly different things that you don't think have any relation. Consilience is where they could come together.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when you're dealing with even like overarching theories of things, musics.
Mm-hmm.
So we call this project because it's this continual learning and continual cross-disciplinary project that's not going to stop at just the publication. The book's kind of just the beginning in some ways. But we kind of called it that eventually. So I'm really excited. That's been one of the. I'm doing a presentation actually. I got my proposal accepted at the College Music Society convention, which I've never done before, but I just took a chance and applied for some of them, and they accepted them.
Oh, excellent!
Next month, so I'll be presenting that along with Jessica and Anne. And I should say, part of the interesting thing about this is it just, we're the three principal investigators in this project. We have a student, we have myself in music, and then Anne in engineering, applied sciences, and there really was no hierarchy. I mean, and most of the time I'm actually deferring to them, deferring to my student, learning from my student. I just realized, like, boy, I had no idea how much I could learn from my students. It's really unfathomable how much you can learn from people if you just put, I just no longer assume I'm an expert. I'm like, I'm not. I can just take that stance. And that was with the project itself. Like when we went to learn music from these various people, our goal was not to just take our Mozart and Beethoven and say, by the way, our music's really great. It was to do the opposite, really not.
Right.
It was to come in really as non-experts, deferring to them, just teaching us what they would. We would share things if they asked. One of the funniest moments is, when they asked me to share something, I was kind of like, oh, I'll play a bunch of movie themes. I'll play a bunch of John Williams themes. My favorite movie songs. And so I played the whole lineup. I played E.T., I played Star Wars, I played Rizla, and they were all kind of laughing. And I said, like, they like, and the woman, the translator, she said, well, they didn't dislike it, but they didn't like it very much. And I said, well, why not? They go, well, they said they can't dance to it.
Ah.
It just makes you realize, like, a lot of times what we think is like immutably great, or like objectively always great for everybody, really is like anything but. It's a very humbling experience, to do that, and just kind of taking a different stance, different way of looking at things. And so that project has been very important to me. And so like I said, I'm giving some presentations. When I'm doing a horn convention coming up, I'll be doing my lecture on this Consilience project. And the book should be coming out probably, hopefully. It's in the publisher's hands now, so we've got it. It's all done. I almost forgot I was to talk about that, but that's been a very significant part of my my work the last couple of years. So.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, I look forward to that. Have you got a title for it yet? Is it called Consilience?
It's called Consilience.
Okay.
Applying Indigenous knowledge. Sorry, my brain's, I can't remember you had to ask here. Anyway, I'm just going to get the actual full title because my brain is now not working. Here, let me get it. It's on every single thing that I have. So, because there actually is another, Consilience. Yeah. Learning about ourselves by applying Indigenous traditions to Western music and technology.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Yeah.
So there's another Consilience by E.O. Wilson, a biologist from the 90s. That's kind of where some of this was taken in some ways, but his was a little bit different take. This is sort of like a different angle on the concept of Consilience that we thought it made sense to us. So I don't know. Anyways, that was a total digression.
No, that's great. I mean, Bernhard, we could keep talking for I know probably about 3 more hours, but I always try to wrap these interviews up a little bit with some talk about the International Horn Society and what that organization has meant to you throughout your career, and just to kind of advocate for it, because as we've mentioned already in this podcast, there's so many distractions out there, and there's a million different things people could be putting their attentions and efforts towards. And for me, and I'm sure for you too, these kinds of organizations like the IHS, like Kendall Betts, like these groups that are greater than the sum of their parts. I think they really do hold a lot of value in especially now, maybe even more than they ever have.
Well, I mean, it's really hard for me to even, it's a humbling notion to consider, because as I mentioned, that first convention I went to in 93, I mean, that took me on a path that introduced me to people. I mean, I met Barry Tuckwell, I met Frank Lloyd, I met all these different people. Kendall Betts, and it's hard for me to even say how. And that was just one day of going to the convention, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
half a day. I remember trying out horns and what's the guy's name? German horn player who's plays Wiener horn.
Oh, Hans Pitzke.
Hans Pitzke, yeah. Hans Pitzke was trying horns right next to me. He was like playing the Siegfried call, like in every single one of them.
Yep.
Like, who is this guy? So it's just, that first experience, it just, for me, it's hard to say how meaningful it was. And then I had the great honor of doing my first convention as an artist in 2008. So that was a really great honor and has kept me fairly close to the organization. I've been a lifetime member since 2004. I just decided to become a lifetime member then after grad school. Doug Hill, obviously our teacher and mentor and friend, he was part of the creators of it. Longtime president and one of the architects of the Horn Society. I think it's difficult because I think a lot of societies, with the advent of the kind of technology we have now, as you say, distractions and the ready accessibility of a lot of information. For instance, things like YouTube, things like free access to all sorts of publishing, music, books, just at the ready, just the unimaginable access to media that we have. What the Horn Convention, I think, used to do up until the advent of the internet was it was one of the only places that people could go and just meet everybody and come in contact with all this information. It was a beacon in some ways. And I think it still is, but people do have access to the information. So I think, how organizations move into the future, I'm really excited. I'm excited about how the Horn Society moves into the future, how it sees itself evolving, because, as you say, because it's so much greater than each individual person in it, it has the potential. I almost honestly think of the Horn Society as just all horn players in some ways. Don't you think that? Don't you think that way?
It's a global community. It should be. Yeah,
it's a global community. I certainly will do my part to keep supporting it. I read the Horn Call every time I get it, and it's a way of connecting people. That is done in a way that no other organization's ever done. So, I would think that it would always stay relevant and it would always, continue growing. Yeah. And again, it's hard for me to say how much it means to me because, the times I had either went to the Horn conventions or, and even like getting the Horn Call itself, like when I was a kid, especially, this was like gold. Getting to see articles by Doug Hill, by Herman Bauman, or whoever, in this magazine. There was just, where else could you see that?
Yep.
So the potential for the organization now with access to technology, and I know it's challenging. I deal with that with the Cormont Music and Horn Camp. We're still learning is that this technology is powerful on a level that it's hard to express in some ways. And how do we use it? And it can certainly be misused. It can certainly also overtake us in some ways. So finding a balance with that's difficult. So, but no, the influence of the Horn Society on me personally in the world, I don't even know if I could really express that in words. It is profound.
Yes, and, to say the least. Yeah,
I am honored to even have an association with the Horn Society, and have always been honored to, when they've asked me to be part of things, it's always one of my highest honors. So as is this interview.
Well, and likewise, and Bernhard, I think that's probably as good a place to end it today. So thank you so much for chatting with me. This has been a great conversation.
Oh my gosh, James, thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure and a joy to talk with you.